Welcome to the More in Common podcast. We all know how hard it can be to handle conflict and disagreements, especially when it comes to politics. These moments can strain even our closest relationships, and that's why we're here. I'm Keith Richardson, and for over 5 years, we at More in Common have worked with professionals from all walks of life, NFL teams, tech companies, and community leaders, ultimately to improve how people connect and communicate. And with my background in psychology, I've spent 20 years refining strategies that focus on compassion and understanding. And I'm joined by my co-host, Gerren, who joined the team 2 years ago. Gerren is a producer, an entrepreneur, and a creative, and he lives the principles we talk about, bringing real-world experience to every episode. Together, we're here to help you discover how we all have more in common than we might think. Enjoy the show. Welcome back. This is the More in Common podcast, where conversations spark connections and connections build community.
I'm Gerren Taylor alongside my man Keith Richardson. Yeah?
No, it's getting bigger. It's getting better.
We dive deep into the human experience, challenging assumptions and building understanding.
From workplace dynamics to personal growth and everything in between, we're going to bring you real stories and bold ideas that aim to bridge divides and create thriving connections.
Because when we embrace our differences, listen and connect, we'll always find that we've got more in common.
Cue music.
Let's get into it.
It's cue music. Let's get into it.
I mean,
what are we getting into today?
Technically, the music's already running there, but that's fine.
Yeah,
we'll
I mean, hey, look, this is recording.
Yeah, that's right. This is the raw side. You guys get into
this
the raw.
This is the raw side.
Right now.
Hey, it's like behind the scenes with Gerren Taylor and Keith Richardson.
Also,
but in front of the scenes as well.
That's a heck of a sweater you got there, Keith.
Yeah.
Oh, you feeling froggy? Feeling festive?
So this episode, for those listening, I'm wearing a nice Christmas-themed cat sweatshirt.
It's a cat collage of Christmas cats.
It is not one cat.
It's not one cat. It's a collage of Christmas cats.
We are recording this episode the week before Christmas. For those who celebrate, Merry Christmas. For those who don't, Happy Holidays. And
heathens.
You heathens. Happy Hanukkah and happy all of
Crispy
the other holidays
Kwanzaa.
that exist.
Is that not?
This could be a really good conversation at some point when we get into the throes of actually talking about topics. Is the Happy Holidays versus Merry Christmas? I happen to celebrate Merry Christmas, so it is the one that I celebrate. Nothing wildly interesting there. But in any case, being that it is the week before Christmas, I thought I would do one of two things. One, bring ridiculousness to the video medium here, right? And two, demonstrate that we don't record them all at the same time. This is actually a different day. Though I could have changed my shirt, but now I have a haircut, so that's happened in between. So there's a lot of visual change here going on.
There's layers.
Just to demonstrate that, look, there's a lot of time in between some of these recordings, and you don't really need to know, but I want to make sure that you understand that, because it's all about me in this case, and in my own insecurities and concerns of
which
judgment.
is a great transition to our topic of the day. Are you feeling a little shame? Are you feeling a little shamed by your sweater there, cowboy?
Should I feel shame wearing this sweater? I don't. I think it's wonderful.
I don't think so.
It's wildly comfortable. It is so comfortable. I don't know. But we're cat people.
I'm a firm believer that
I do love cats.
I would never shame a man for wearing a cat sweater. I don't think.
Well, I would appreciate that. And this is an interesting thing. I would not receive that shame anyway.
That's very good. So this is actually where we should start, I think, because a lot of people interchange shame and guilt often in their lives, because of these topics sometimes, get thrown around, these labels get thrown around, but we don't take the time to define them. So go ahead and split it up. What is the difference between shame and guilt?
Yeah, this kind of goes back to our check-in episode where we're talking about emotional awareness and emotional, they're both on the same spectrum, right? Of emotional experience. Shame is a deep feeling of being, well, to simplify it in its easiest terms, shame is a deep feeling of being wrong. Like, I am wrong as a human being for acting and thinking or being a certain way, right? Guilt is I did something wrong and I feel bad that I did or act a certain way or a thing, right? So they are different emotional experiences. But I think this is the important thing, is what is wrong, right? If I am wrong or I acted wrong, what defines wrong? And this is where the complexities of shame and guilt get really hard to navigate. And we're talking about it in the spirit of this idea. Like, we're about dialogue, we're about connection, we're about like, look, at the core of what we're trying to do is create an environment where we can act more cohesively together and not have such polarization in our small circles, which can then grow into larger, influence from circle to circle to a broader ecosystem. But if we can temper back the hostility and the anger that we have towards others, it's never going to be perfect, but we create a larger cultural expectation, and then we are able to just move more fluidly, right? It doesn't make decisions easier. It doesn't make cultural challenges any easier. It just makes our lives together easier on a day-to-day basis. That's kind of the point, right? Go ahead.
Well, I think it's interesting too, because we see the kind of shaming of others manifest a lot as people self-select into their groups for whatever reasons. Usually when someone doesn't align with those group expectations, shame is almost used as a bludgeon to try to get them to come along to what the group value or thought process around a certain thing is.
So you just hit a nail on a head with a really, like, surgical hammer. Like you hit that spot on, because that's the point of shame and guilt. Like, we've talked about the emotional experience that we all have. There is an evolutionary origin to these things. The majority of our emotions are to keep us going, help us survive, and help us collaborate and connect with other people in order to survive, right? Like, it all comes back to what gives me the best chance of survival. Well, in order to collaborate with other people, there needs to be a common set of expectations of behavior, right? Because we need trust and we need to work together. If you think something completely opposite than I think or feel, we actually decrease our chance of survival, because we're going to spend more time either reconciling or in conflict and less time navigating the absolute basics of human survival. Shame and guilt come along to create an emotional navigable tool for our brains to increase social order. So, in other words, I feel guilty I did something wrong. This goes back to who defines wrong. The group defines wrong, but what group? The group that you belong to that's moving forward in a certain way.
Right.
And so from an evolutionary standpoint, that group is static.
right? That group is fairly stationary. Or maybe it's one of 2 or 3 groups that are part of the operating functions of a tribe, right?
Well,
The
I think
gatherers have a set of expectations and hunters have a set of expectations. So we have to manage within those things as we go and accomplish those tasks. Before I continue, go.
Well, even in our most rudimentary experiences, right? Our first experiences with shame and guilt usually come from our parents, right? Like a certain behavior is considered acceptable or not acceptable. Or the way my mom used to say it is, we don't yell in the store. We don't run in this particular, you know what I mean? Like saying that this is identifying us as a group and these are the behaviors that this group finds acceptable or not acceptable.
And shame helps form our identity if we can manage it. Now, I'm not a deep emotional management of shame expert. I'm not even going to pretend to be, because shame spirals and, the throes of shame that people go through need professional management and assistance, right? Because it is a deep personal experience in modern society in 2024, right? Guilt is easier to understand, but we often hear, you should feel shame. You should feel shame. And this is where it fails so often, because we tend to use that arrow at people that don't belong to our group. Right? Mm. Because what someone does might violate my group's behavioral expectations, but it might actually be reinforced by their group's behavioral expectations. And if that exists, they're never going to feel shame just because you think what they did is shameful. And this applies in work. It applies at home. Like using a work experience, if you're in sales, and I'm going to use one from my past professional life, and I'm in contracts and negotiation. The sales team may try to make me feel guilty or some sort of shame because what I'm doing violates what they're trying to accomplish. But at the end of the day, what I'm trying to accomplish is actually in contrast to sales. So sales wants to get the deal done at any cost. In contracts, we want to build a deal that is good for the business. Sometimes those things don't work together. So your guilt and shame might affect me in the moment. Like, I feel bad that I'm not allowing you to do it. But guess what? I am validated in my behavior by my group, because this is what we are supposed to be doing, right? And this is it. So my boss and my boss's boss are like, no, you do what you're supposed to be doing. So guess what? I'm not going to be shamed into coming over and doing what you want me to do, right? Now, if I feel a stronger attachment to the sales team, even though I'm in my role, I might actually act in favor of the sales team because of my connection to them, and might actually not like my job, right? Because they're constantly telling me I'm doing things wrong and I'm not doing things the right way. But here I am because this is the job that I have, which adds another complicating variable to the shame ecosystem, is our indexing on the individualistic ecosystem that we live in. Because now we all have our own values. We all read our own stuff.
Right.
We all learn our own things. We all create our own little pockets of family in raising our children. And we don't have, like, when people say community, I've been thinking about this a lot lately. When people say community, it's really just a space of shared resources. Because we're not collectively getting together and having these discussions about what we value. What do we care about? How do we want? No, we rely on the nuclear family dynamic to do its own research and learn. And they're picking from, holy crap, how many different resources do we have access to now? So you're only able to get little things here and there. And it's wildly complicated. And I will use this example that recently came up around Christmas. There's research out there that they're just different ways of managing Santa, right? Some families have a personal value that we won't lie to our kids, so we'll never tell them about Santa, right? And then everybody else goes, what? How dare you do that, right? Like, that's so terrible for your kids. And they're like, nope, that's what I want to do. Pocket. We, minimalist. Santa gives a couple of gifts. The rest come from us as a family. Other families give all gifts from Santa, right? So now what happens? These kids all share a common space at school.
Right.
And these kids go, oh, Santa only got me 2 things. Oh, who's Santa? Santa doesn't exist. Oh, Santa gets me an iPad and an iPhone and all of the things that parents in the middle group got their kids.
Right.
And it creates this ecosystem of inconsistent social expectations, but we judge everything based on our personal life experience, and we think everybody else is doing it wrong. And we're not actually sitting around as a community coming together going, this is how we should function. This is how we should behave. Cell phones are another one, but I won't go down on that diatribe at this point. And this is why shaming other, I'll bring it full circle and then I'll pause. Saying, I am going to shame you may work, but it probably won't, especially if that person is not a part of your group. Gerren, you could shame me probably pretty easily in IU because we share a common space, but your neighbor that you talk to once a year, probably not.
I think another interesting way that this manifests in our current zeitgeist of society is the trans bathroom discussions and debates, right? The people who believe that trans folks should not use the restroom of their gender usually think, hey, that's a shameful behavior. Like, you shouldn't be here. But the folks who are trying to identify and honor their own gender identity are saying, yo, no, that is who I am part of this group. And thus, I won't receive your shame because this is where I'm supposed to be. And that disconnect creates such a, it's honestly not that large of a percentage of the population who are going through this, but it's such a large topic of debate. And I think it's because of such the polarization between how people view themselves and society and whether or not the shame, quote unquote, should be accepted.
I love that example. Because it is reflective of different social priorities. I don't mean the use of bathroom as a social priority, because on the flip side, the individual who's trying to use the bathroom that is assigned to their identity, right, is saying, how can you treat me this way? How can you not see me as a person? And the other person is just like, we're having 2 different conversations, right? Like, that person's not even understanding necessarily what you're trying to do. And both sides are trying to shame each other based on their own cultural values or personal values that are completely misaligned to expectations from the other party. And this is where, and we can talk about this, I think I have, when we bring on a particular guest that I have in mind, and really the anchoring on our differences before we find our commonalities becomes so important. Because we have to be able to see, going back to meeting people where they are, where someone else is actually coming from in order to unpack to get to that shared space of value. So you can then say, see, this is where I'm coming from too. And then, and only then, after a lot of patience, a lot of implementing the tools that we try to put out there, in a lot of time, can you come to a place where it's like, okay, I can see that. And we're, again, talking about the majority of human experience, not just the people online who are trolls and not, like let's cut off the edges and let's focus on the middle part of the pizza that doesn't have crust. Though I do love crust.
Yeah, right. No one's going to shame you for eating the crust, I promise. But you mentioned
maybe someone hates crust.
If you're an anti-crust eater, let us know in the comments. But but kind of coming back to that, like, what do you think the folly is? Why do people try to use shame as a tool for folks that aren't necessarily aligned in their group, and how does that end up being a failure? Often.
I'm gonna disclaimer this as a non-clinical validated, like this is my thought and opinion based on my knowledge and understanding, but this isn't some research that I've read associated with the why. When you think about the nature of our experience, we look at the world from our worldview and what validates our worldview, and that's our social ecosystem, right? So the people that we are a part of, because we are all connected. We just have our own little pocket over here that's more connected than that is connected to other people, from ideological, emotional experience, social experience. There's just so many different ways to live life, right? We simplify the world that we live in based on our validated beliefs and what make us feel right, right? This is why philosophy as a practice can get really, really far away from just the experience of life, depending on the philosopher that you're paying attention to. So we're simplifying our experience in order to go about our life, in order to survive today, in order to live for tomorrow. Shame is part of that formula. So I am validated in my space. Shame is a viable tool. Like it exists for a reason. Guilt is a viable tool. It exists for a reason. It's just a matter of, in 2024, when we have 8 billion people on the planet, it's who's wielding it and at who, right? Am I someone who is used to fighting a war with bows and arrows? And I'm shooting those, so we're used to that ecosystem, and then all of a sudden someone comes along with guns, and now we're not fighting the same fight anymore, right? It's probably a bad analogy, let's be honest. It made sense in my head at first, but then I couldn't carry it forward. I didn't know exactly where I was going to take it, but maybe it paints the right picture, a wildly, overly violent picture. But we're not, like, it is a tool to be wielded, but not outside of the groups that you follow. Now, you might get lucky. And I'm going to share a story. You might get lucky. This represents the entirety of this from a very anecdotal perspective. I was about 26 years old. I'm riding the bus in Chicago to work. And every day I ride the bus, I sit down because they're packed. You take the first seat that you can get, right? Well, on this unfortunate day for my life, yet very fortunate for my learning experience, I sat down in the front of the bus, and there are these 2 spaces, not actual seats, like sections that are reserved for people with disabilities, right? And this individual, I can't remember, but I think he was an older blind gentleman that came on the bus. And me and one other guy next to me, about the same age, in our mid to late 20s, are the only 2 dudes sitting down. The rest are, 40s, 50s, year-old women. And he and I don't know this guy. We just sat there as an immature 26-year-old who's just going about his day, not really paying attention to the world around me. I saw the guy get on the bus, but I just didn't think about it. And this woman from across the bus looks at me and him and goes, "You two should be ashamed of yourself. Fine, I'll stand up." She has no idea who I am. She has no idea what I believe, right? She has no idea the social circumstances that I'm a part of. I wish I could talk to her today and say thank you for doing that, because this is one of those circumstances where it works. But this is another complicated element of it, because you're adding your own personal value into this formula. It took me about 2 weeks for that to actually sink in. Because at first, I was like, who the hell are you, lady? Why don't you stand up? You've got 2 legs. You're capable of standing up. So good. You stand up. Of course, I didn't say this out loud, but it was in my head, because I am resistant now to your desire to impose your worldview onto me simply because you think it's right, and I'm not even thinking about it. Over time, I start thinking about it more and realizing, of course I should be ashamed of myself. That's not the person I want to be. I want to be a person who stands up for someone who needs the seat more than I do. Mm-hmm. My legs work just fine. I don't care if she can stand up or not. That's actually an irrelevant data point to the formula of my life experience. I am going to be a person that stands up going forward. And in fact, it was 15 years before I sat down again on a bus. That's a different, I just go and I stand on a bus, because why even complicate the thing? Like, I'm just going to stand until there are just a bunch of seats and I can sit down. The point is, her shame had nothing to do, like, she didn't know if that mattered to me, but it worked. But using that as an example of a time it worked doesn't mean it is a valid tool to consistently wield. With one caveat: always try to wield it towards politicians and people in power as much as you can, because you, as a group or a body that is an activist or whatever the case may be, is trying to influence what social expectations people in power are anchoring on to make the decisions that they're making that impact and affect you. That is different. I'm talking about day-to-day interaction. I feel like I could talk about this forever, so I'm going to take a breath.
Actually, we're going to take a break. We're going to take a break right there, and we'll come back, and then we'll close out this discussion, and I won't shame you for talking so long. This is the More in Common Podcast. We'll be right back. And now the conclusion of our conversation. We're back at the More in Common Podcast. Gerren Taylor here with Keith Richardson. Your cats are still fucking balling us.
They're out there, and they're going to be here for the next episode too, isn't that? They're going to be out here because we're bulk recording today, and we're going to see this.
Let's do it.
I want to keep this sweater alive. I want to wear it in a recording for as long as it'll last, because I only wear it like twice a year.
There you go. Just hang it up and leave it in the studio. That way,
it's gonna go next to
my recording uniform,
my Mandalorian starship over here.
There you go. Well, we were talking about shame. We were talking about how shame can affect people both within the group and outside of your own group, and we haven't really touched on overcoming internal shame a little bit. Is there anything that you wanted to add about that? Like, sometimes it affects us in ways that aren't as productive. What do you think helps to break the internal shame cycle that people kind of go through? And I know this is like, we don't want to go too deep into the therapy side, but there are some basic things and thoughts that people can try and use.
Yeah, I mean, it very much, I would start like just from, first of all, if there are deep shame, trauma-induced shame, there's childhood-induced shame, there's cultural-induced shame that's really hard to reconcile and understand. I would definitely encourage you to seek a professional and talk to them. I am a huge advocate for therapy. I will always say, if it's not working with one therapist, find another. Finding a good therapist is like finding a spouse for the rest of your life. Like, you got to date a little bit before you land on it. And some people, hey, they married their high school sweetheart, and that's awesome. But many of us have to go through the I can never find someone stage, and just keep persevering because it's really worth it. I would say very much there is an exercise that a lot of high performance people will do. Brene Brown talks about it. Dr. Mike Gervais talks about it, is understanding your value, your values. Brene Brown boils it down to 2. And I used to be really resistant to that until recently, where I have now boiled my core values down to 2 things. And that is compassion and honesty. And if you can really boil down to the 2 things that you truly value as a person, you will be able to understand more of where your shame is coming from, because it's likely an inconsistency with that value. I would also potentially go through the exercise of understanding the cultural values of the ecosystems that you're in, because there might be a possibility that you're just surrounding yourself with people that don't align to your values, and you might need to find a different social group. Like, this is the benefit of 2024, is that we can find different social groups. But it's challenging. It's hard, because there are a lot out there and we don't always know how to access it, which is why we stay where we are, because we know it, even though it's causing us pain. So from an actual standpoint, those would be 2 things that I would do. And they have been wildly helpful for me, navigating and understanding when and why I feel guilty and when and why I might feel shame.
I also
I don't know. What do you think, Gerren? I have not asked you a single question in this entire episode.
Right.
I do feel guilty. Like, I've just been rambling and talking because I really love this topic. But I don't know. What are your takeaways? What do you want to share? What do you want to add?
Well, I think that one of the things that we talk about a lot is meeting yourself where you're at. Self-compassion is the ultimate thing, I think, for avoiding the pitfalls of shame. Look, there are some times where you are supposed to learn from it and you did mess up. But again, it's the difference between feeling guilty for an action and literally defining yourself as a person that should feel shame because you are a bad person. No, you can learn from instances where a lady yells at you on the bus for being a ridiculous 26-year-old. Like, that's using the shaming in a positive framework for yourself, but giving yourself compassion, meeting yourself where you are, and understanding that growth and that healing is good for you, right? Like, if you feel this way, it's because of something. It's because something is not aligned, and seeking that alignment will only help you grow and succeed.
That's
it. My mic dropping. I'm out of here, guys.
My mouth is done. I've got nothing else to say. Like, mic drop on that. And just, hey, look, when you share this episode with somebody, just say, hey, fast forward to like the last 30 seconds, because the gold is right there. You can listen to the white dude just ramble and ramble and ramble all you want, like, if you're interested in what he's got to say. But the gold nugget was right there at the end. So, definitely share it. Hey, like it. If you're interested in what More in Common does outside of this podcast, moreincommonent.com, give us a comment. Like, look, every podcaster wants more eyeballs or more ears on what they're doing. And we'll be shameless about that. Like, that's appropriate activity within the podcast ecosystem. So we're going to ask you the same thing, and subscribe if you want to hear more, because the next episode, you want it to automatically pop into your feed so you can see this sweatshirt one more time.
I was going to say, and you can't get enough of Keith's cats. So that's yet another reason to subscribe and share.
Another reason.
This is the More in Common podcast, y'all. I'm Gerren. That's Keith Richardson. We will see you next week.
Yes, sir.